Have you ever tuned into the Metro and caught the tail end of a conversation you had to hear all the way through? Or maybe you wanted to share the episode with a friend. You can. The Metro is also available as a podcast. Just look for the Metro on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Politics is moving fast in America, but abroad, it's moving quicker and deadlier. That's especially true in parts of the Middle East. On Friday, Israel launched attacks on Iran, intending to hit Iran's uranium enrichment site, where it's building nuclear arms. It also attacked that country's military sites. Iran has since retaliated with aerial attacks on Israel. For almost a week now, the two countries have continued military operations. Israel has killed at least 224 people in Iran, and Iran has killed 24 people in Israel. Now, this war is deeply concerning to many people, first and foremost to civilians in harm's way. It's also concerning to Americans. That's because this past weekend, Israel asked the U.S. to join its side in the war, since Israel lacks the capacity to destroy the space where Iran is developing nuclear weapons. But U.S. intelligence officials say Tehran was up to 3 years away from fully developing a weapon and that it's not actively pursuing a bomb. That's according to recent reporting from CNN. The U.S. continues to provide weapons and warplanes to Israel, including a recent shipment, but it has yet to directly engage militarily in the war. And Trump thus far has called for Iran's unconditional surrender. Meanwhile, Israeli forces just killed at least 70 Palestinians near aid distribution sites in Gaza. Israeli forces have killed over 55,000 Palestinians since the war began, and civilians are at risk of starvation. What does all this say about Israel's role in the Middle East? And what will the U.S. do? To discuss all this, we have Khan Saeed here. He's an associate professor of teaching in Near Eastern Studies at Wayne State University. Professor Saeed, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Robin. Actually, it's Professor Khan. Saeed's my first name.
Thank you.
No problem.
Tell me if I'm getting this right. Israel began this war against Iran, which Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been planning for months, because it says it wants to remove Iran's nuclear arsenal. Is that right?
I would actually just provide one correction to that, and that is that Prime Minister Netanyahu has actually wanted an attack against Iran for the last 30 years. If we take a look at a broader arc of his rhetoric, he has been trying to persuade the United States specifically and the world more broadly that Iran poses a nuclear threat, and even as far back as 1995 claiming that Iran was, quote unquote, within months of being weapons-grade capable. That didn't happen. And more recently, as you rightly said, in March, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, said that Iran is still, in American intelligence estimation, years away from developing that. Somehow or the other, President Trump seems to be more persuaded by Prime Minister Netanyahu than by his own appointed Director of National Intelligence on Air Force One just the other day, I think coming back from Calgary in the G7 summit. When asked this question, President Trump said he didn't care what Tulsi Gabbard said. So it seems as though when it comes to Iran, which has certainly been scapegoated for quite some time. We have to remember that back in 1979, Iran did take 52 Americans hostage at the embassy, U.S. embassy there, only to be released in January of 1981. And yet at the same time, we've had a very odd relationship with Iran. The Reagan administration was involved with the so-called Iran-Contra affair. that we needed Iran for spare parts and weapons to give to the Contras that we were backing in Nicaragua in the 80s. But when it comes to Iran and the specter of nuclear confrontation, this seems to be much more of a contrivance by Netanyahu, and it seems as though he finally was successful in persuading the United States to at least look the other way, if not facilitate, and also to help with the attacks that we've seen over the last 96 hours.
So what you're saying is that this fits a long pattern with Israel in terms of saying Iran is very close to building these weapons. It is, let's say, imminent. And this is something that Israel has been saying for decades?
This is the narrative, perhaps more than the pattern, I would say, Robin. And it involves two words that the Israelis like to use. One is a word that you just used, which is imminent. And the other is existential, claiming that a nuclear Iran poses an existential threat to the country. It's a similar word that the Israelis use when it comes to Hamas. It's a similar word that is used vis-a-vis Hezbollah, neither of which has anything close to the kind of military capability that a state would. Now, granted, Iran does have, as a sovereign state, a larger military than these militia groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. But the question then also becomes, if Iran actually was interested in developing a nuclear weapon, would it use a nuclear weapon, and would it use it, in fact, against Israel? Notwithstanding rhetoric that is bandied about back and forth, I'm a child of the Cold War, and I remember similar rhetoric between the United States and the Soviet Union. I think it was Nikita Khrushchev who said that he would bury us. He didn't. He, in fact, is, I believe, buried himself after his death. But we find then that there's something known as mutually assured destruction. Nuclear countries tend to understand the magnitude of the destruction that occurs. And remember, there's only 2 nuclear weapons that have ever been detonated in combat, and both by the United States and both against Japan, coming up on 80 years now this summer, Hiroshima and Nagasaki respectively. The idea of a nuclear Iran would simply mean that there would be parity with a nuclear Israel. Israel is a nuclear power by all estimates, although it officially does not declare to have a nuclear arsenal, estimated around 200 weapons. But what happens is it changes the balance of diplomacy, and it changes the battle of combat completely to be at par with someone. There is no seeming rationale why Iran would jeopardize using a nuclear weapon against Israel. I think that this whole idea about an ideological animosity is just not there. There's no threat to Iran that would warrant a nuclear strike on Israel, and certainly they wouldn't do it just to champion the Palestinian cause.
Professor Khan, do you feel that some of the things that you're discussing right now, some of these nuances are largely lost in the conversation? I mean, certainly talking about Israel as a nuclear power, talking about the fact that Israel has been trying to make something like this happen by warning of the imminent threat of a nuclear bomb from that Iran is developing. Is most of this, do you feel like a lot of this, I guess, is getting lost in the crosshairs of conversation?
Well, I think if we take a look at some of the broader conversations, whether they're in the media, whether they're in civil society, and certainly if we were to examine our politicians, our policymakers, we'll find that it's not a very balanced conversation. Iran, after the 1979 revolution, has fallen out of favor. When it comes to the United States. Prior to 1979, it was one of our closest allies in the Persian Gulf. But this whole idea of the framing of Iran as some kind of irrational menace gains a lot of currency. And the very idea that, for example, Iran would not commit to agreements or treaties. I mean, this is the whole idea that Prime Minister Netanyahu says, well, we just simply cannot trust Iran. It's important to remember that under the Obama administration, there was, in fact, a nuclear deal, one that President Trump removed the United States from it when he came to office, primarily because it was a deal that Obama made, but also because Netanyahu was able to persuade him that this is a bad deal. It actually wasn't. The Iranians were under compliance. Even the International Atomic Energy Agency vouchsafed that Iran was allowing investigators. It was certainly within compliance of operating and enriching uranium at the levels that had been negotiated, a negotiation which, by the way, took 2 years and well over 50 meetings between Iranian and American officials. And by all accounts, until the United States withdrew from the agreement, things were under compliance and were being committed. Conversely, what is sometimes lost from the debate is the fact that, unlike Iran, Israel is not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and again, does not allow for inspections or investigation of its own nuclear facilities. So, again, the whole idea then of rhetoric, the whole idea about the conversation being broader and more comprehensive, as you said, I think is quite elusive.
And then at the same time, many Iranian leaders going back decades have said, Professor Khan, that they want Israel to be, quote, wiped off the face of the earth. Why is Iranian leadership antagonistic toward Israel?
Well, I think a lot of the translation, from my understanding, and I'm not fluent in Farsi, is that they want the Zionist entity to be removed off the face of the earth. I know it might seem like a subtle distinction, but they see Israel as being an encroachment on the area, the last vestige of European or Western colonialism in the region. This is, of course, their perspective on it, and they see it as being a destabilizing force in the region. It's interesting to acknowledge that Iran actually does have a Jewish community within it, and in fact, that Jewish community made a statement backing the Iranian leadership and condemning Israel's attacks on the country. Now, some, of course, would say that they're doing so under duress, but the Jewish community in Iran is one that didn't fully leave even after the revolution. So I think that the conflation of sovereign state rhetoric, of religious rhetoric, and ethnic rhetoric oftentimes gets muddled when understanding that these are geopolitical issues first and foremost.
And this reminds us, too, that oftentimes Western media, Western analysts paint the Middle East with these broad brushstrokes. I mean, when you talk about Jewish people living in Iran, this is something that some Americans are not thinking about. They're seeing Iran as this monolith. They're not seeing it as this culturally diverse, ethnically diverse society.
Well, I mean, most Americans, if they do think of equating Iran and a Jewish community, they might refer to the Shahs of Sunset, this reality TV show. It's important to recognize that that was a community that left Iran by and large because of their affinity for or proximity to the Shah, the last Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who was a dictator, who was a brutal dictator, and one who had essentially been installed and legitimized by the United States after 1953, when the United States and Great Britain instigated a coup d'etat against a democratically elected Mohammad Mossadegh. It's one of the many reasons why the Iranians, who do have long memories because their civilization is 10 times older than the United States has been a country, look with a lot of skepticism then at really not only American policy, but also American commitment to agreements that they have made in the past. But as you rightly said, we tend to look at the entire region in a very broad stroke.
We're talking about Israel's attacks on Iran, which began last week, and Iran's retaliations. Our guest is Professor Saeed Khan. He's an associate professor of teaching in Near Eastern Studies at Wayne State University. We'll be right back. back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. We're talking about Israel's attacks on Iran, which began last week, and Iran's retaliations. Our guest is Saeed Khan. He's an associate professor of teaching in Near Eastern Studies at Wayne State University. Professor Khan, Israel has killed hundreds of Iranians already in this war. What do you know in terms of what things are like for people in Tehran, the capital of that country, and in other cities in Iran?
It's interesting when you ask the question about what is missing from the conversation here in the United States. Media coverage across the world has actually been quite robust in reporting from Iran and offering what has been the impact occurring there. One of the things that's happening is certainly an expansion of the targets from what had been stated by the Israelis on Friday. This idea that it was against the nuclear facilities, some military facilities, and some intelligence facilities. But the building housing the state television network of Iran was hit. Apartment buildings have been hit. The families of physicists, professors, even the chief negotiator who was engaging with the United States in efforts to resurrect the nuclear deal was killed, as well as his family. A colleague of mine actually is in Iran right now, and she's trying to post dispatches of what is going on. Descriptions of car bombs that have been going off in Tehran to create mass chaos. Ones that have been verified by the Israeli Mossad, the intelligence and security agency, almost boastfully saying this is the level of infiltration. A mosque in the northeastern part of Iran, Mashhad, was also hit. I'm not sure about its nuclear, military, or intelligence significance. It's a place of worship. But this seems to be intended to create a sense of hysteria, a sense of panic, and chaos. And a part of this is with the rhetoric both coming out of Israel as well as from the White House. It seems that one of the stated goals now is not perhaps regime change, but maybe regime collapse, to create a sense of anarchy, which would then bring in either a puppet regime that is amenable to both the Israelis and the Americans, the eldest son of the last Shah of Iran, who lives in the United States, seems to be waiting in the wings as perhaps the savior of a kind of liberation from the theocratic government of Iran. But it's always ironic to hear language of liberation that is brought at the tip of the sword. As in this case, I'm not sure if the Iranian people would see either Prime Minister Netanyahu or President Trump as their champions if they are, in fact, so upset about their regime. In fact, usually such combat galvanizes a population against an external threat that they're facing.
This language of liberation, of so-called liberation, I mean, we heard this during the U.S.-led invasions of Iraq. We actually just very recently heard it in terms of the protests, which have been mostly peaceful in Los Angeles. And so what you're saying is hearing this talk of so-called liberation is actually a warning sign. It's actually raising alarms in your mind.
I think it was George Orwell who talked about doublespeak and freedom is tyranny and war is peace. And you find that societies like Iran and others around the world tend to be a bit more skeptical, even cynical, when they hear this kind of rhetoric. And part of it is because they have long histories. And in some cases, they even have past history with the United States. As I said, the idea of liberating Iran from its own democratically elected prime minister who had nationalized the oil industry in 1951 liberating it by bringing in a dictator doesn't exactly wash for many people. And so I think it's an overestimation to think that the Iranian people are going to greet Israeli and American troops the way, as you rightly referred to, in the case of Iraq in 2003. What is, I think, something to consider is, as we remember in 2003, in the lead up to that war, it was imposed upon us by quite a bit of deception, the whole idea about yellow cakes, weapons of mass destruction. And it's an eerie parallel to then see this whole notion of Iran as an imminent and existential nuclear threat right now.
Professor Khan, let's stay on America's role in all of this if we could. Israel wants American involvement, direct involvement to destroy Iran's nuclear sites. President Trump has been supporting Israel and continues to send it weapons and warplanes. But again, the U.S. has not yet directly entered the war. Here's a clip of Trump recently talking to the press at a Group of 7 meeting last week.
It's painful for both parties, but I'd say Iran is not winning this war, and they should talk, and they should talk immediately before it's too late.
So you mentioned that you envision the U.S. and Israel wanting to, let's say, install a puppet dictatorship. Is that what you see then as the potential end game in all of this? In other words, what is the Trump administration considering doing in this war?
Well, I would say that the United States is already directly involved in several different dimensions. One is the use of the giving of air tankers for refueling purposes for Israeli jets, the sharing of intelligence, just because there's not the proverbial American troops on the ground, or the use of American weapons thus far by American military people. After all, have to remember that Israel's military is mostly through American supplied equipment. That's a distinction that, again, I don't think parties in the region really see or appreciate, or anywhere else. The United States is very much involved, and the implications of this remain to be seen. In the conflict, as far as whether it broadens. As far as what is the American objective, it seems there's a few. The stated one is to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon, which by taking out the nuclear facilities would be achieved, or even by American acknowledgement, may not completely remove the possibility of Iran being nuclear military capable, but delaying it even farther than what the estimates are. If this is an opportunity to run the proverbial table, that seems to be what is happening. And part of it is probably a sense of empowerment that the fall of the Assad regime in Syria meant that now there was the promise of perhaps bringing in a new regime in Iran. Again, looking back 20 years at the Iraq War, it proved not to either be smooth or successful. And I doubt that that is something that can be achieved in this case either.
Professor Khan, this has been very enlightening. Before we let you go, when we consider Israel's war against Hamas and the humanitarian crisis it's created in Gaza, it seems like Israel is starting to become a global pariah, especially among European countries. What might be the consequences for Israel if it continues its wars, and more broadly for the world?
Well, this is an interesting question, because if there was an inclination for these countries, on the street in many countries, there's already this branding of Israel as a pariah state. But as far as among leadership, if it did seem as though there was a leaning in the other direction, remember this week there was supposed to be a meeting that was instigated by the French and the Saudis to discuss the possible broader recognition of a Palestinian state. That, of course, didn't happen because of what the Israeli attacks then did on Friday. But the idea then that you have the leadership of many Western countries, which we saw evident at the G7 summit in Calgary, that they're just simply saying, well, Israel has a right to defend itself, and we will go ahead and support it. So Gaza has moved off the radar, so to speak, right now because of the current conflict with Iran.
Saeed Khan, Associate Professor of Teaching in Near Eastern Studies at Wayne State University. Professor Khan, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up on the Metro, LGBTQ rights and representation have expanded over the years, but Latino LGBTQ representation is often overlooked. We'll learn more about that in roughly 7 minutes. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. And this is the Metro. Stay with us.